Injuries may be forgiven, but not forgotten.
The Countryman and the Serpent. A countryman's son by accident trod upon a serpent's tail, which turned and bit him so that he died. The father in a rage got his axe, and pursuing the serpent, cut off part of its tail. So the serpent in revenge began stinging several of the farmer's cattle and caused him severe loss. Well, the farmer thought it best to make it up with the serpent, and brought food and honey to the mouth of its lair, and said to it, "Let's forget and forgive. Perhaps you were right to punish my son, and take vengeance on my cattle, but surely I was right in trying to revenge him. Now that we are both satisfied, why should not we be friends again?" "No, no," said the serpent. "Take away your gifts. You can never forget the death of your son, nor I the loss of my tail. Injuries may be forgiven, but not forgotten. Now, let's dive to some important life lessons we can learn from the fables. 1. The nature of conflict and its consequences. The fable begins with an accidental harm, the countryman's son stepping on the serpent's tail. This small, unintended act sets off a chain reaction of retaliation and suffering. The serpent bites the son, the father seeks revenge by cutting off the serpent's tail, and the serpent, in turn, harms the farmer's cattle. This cycle of vengeance escalates until both parties are left with irreparable losses. Life lesson: conflicts often begin with small, unintentional actions. A careless word, a misunderstanding, or even an accident, like the son stepping on the serpent's tail. But when met with retaliation, these small sparks can ignite a fire of suffering. The serpent bites the boy, the farmer cuts off its tail, and the serpent attacks the cattle. Each act of revenge deepens the wounds, leaving both sides with irreparable losses. This teaches us that conflict escalates when met with retaliation. In our own lives, how often do we respond to minor slights with anger or revenge? A harsh word, a grudge held too long, or an impulsive reaction can turn a small disagreement into a lifelong feud. The fable reminds us to pause before reacting. Instead of meeting harm with harm, we can choose to de-escalate, to seek understanding, communicate openly, and break the cycle of retaliation. As the saying goes, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. A moment of patience can prevent a lifetime of regret. 2. The limits of forgiveness. The farmer attempts to reconcile with the serpent by offering food and honey, suggesting they forget and forgive. However, the serpent wisely responds that neither of them can truly forget what has happened. The farmer cannot forget the death of his son, and the serpent cannot forget the loss of its tail. Life lesson: the farmer's attempt to reconcile is noble. He brings food and honey to the serpent, saying, "Let's forget and forgive." But the serpent's response is stark. "You can never forget the death of your son, nor I the loss of my tail." This moment reveals a profound truth: forgiveness does not erase the past. In life, we often hear the phrase, "forgive and forget," but the reality is more complex. While forgiveness can heal and free us from anger, the scars of harm, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, often remain. We can choose to let go of resentment, but we cannot pretend the hurt never happened. Forgiveness is not about erasing the past, it's about releasing the burden of pain and choosing to move forward. It's a gift we give ourselves, not necessarily the person who hurt us. This lesson challenges us to forgive, not because the harm was insignificant, but because holding onto anger only deepens our own suffering. As the serpent shows, some wounds leave lasting marks, but those marks can also remind us of our resilience and capacity to heal. 3. The irreversibility of harm. The farmer and the serpent both suffer irreversible losses. The farmer loses his son, and the serpent loses its tail. These losses symbolize the permanent damage that can result from conflict and retaliation. Life lesson: the farmer loses his son. The serpent loses its tail. Both suffer losses that can never be undone. These irreversible consequences symbolize the permanent damage that conflict and retaliation can cause. In life, we often act in anger or haste, only to realize later that our actions have caused harm that cannot be taken back. A harsh word spoken in anger, a decision made out of spite, or an act of revenge can leave scars that last a lifetime. This fable reminds us to think before we act. Every action has consequences, and some of those consequences are permanent. It also challenges us to consider the cost of revenge. The farmer's act of cutting off the serpent's tail doesn't bring his son back. It only deepens the cycle of harm. Similarly, in our own lives, seeking revenge rarely brings satisfaction. Instead, it often leads to more pain and regret. The wiser path is to pause, reflect, and choose actions that heal rather than harm. 4. The illusion of reconciliation. The farmer's attempt to make peace with the serpent is noble, but it ultimately fails. The serpent's response, "You can never forget the death of your son, nor I the loss of my tail," reveals that true reconciliation is impossible when the harm done is too great. Life lesson: the farmer's attempt to make peace is admirable. He brings gifts, acknowledges his own role in the conflict, and suggests they move forward. But the serpent's response is a sobering reminder. "You can never forget the death of your son, nor I the loss of my tail." This moment teaches us that not all relationships can be repaired. When the harm done is too great, whether it's betrayal, loss, or deep hurt, true reconciliation may be impossible. This doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for peace or understanding, but it does mean we must approach reconciliation with realistic expectations. In life, we often hope to fix broken relationships, but sometimes the healthiest choice is to accept that some wounds are too deep to heal fully. This doesn't mean we should give up on forgiveness or peace. It means we should focus on healing ourselves and moving forward without bitterness. The farmer's attempt at reconciliation, though unsuccessful, shows the importance of trying. Even when reconciliation fails, the act of reaching out can bring closure and peace of mind. Final reflection. The fable ends with a powerful truth. Injuries may be forgiven, but not forgotten. This timeless lesson reminds us that while we can choose to let go of anger and resentment, the scars of harm remain. It challenges us to act with mindfulness, seek understanding, and approach conflicts with patience and compassion. In a world where conflicts are inevitable, this fable serves as a guide for navigating them with wisdom. It teaches us to break the cycle of retaliation, embrace the power of forgiveness, and accept the irreversibility of harm. Most importantly, it reminds us that while we cannot change the past, we can always choose how we move forward.